May the words of my mouth and the meditation of all our hearts be acceptable to you, O God, our rock and redeemer. What does love look like? Christian love, that is. That question in various formulations has become the abiding question of my life. And I would argue that it is or should be central to every Christian life. A persistent, nagging question. After all, Jesus left his disciples with one commandment: love one another as I have loved you. And while we know he had great affection for his close companions, his command was understood not as emotion or sentiment, but as action. We know love by this, that he laid down his life for us. The author of 1 John puts it this way: we ought to lay down our lives for one another. I like the way the Message phrases it. This is how we've come to understand and experience love. Christ sacrificed his life for us. This is why we ought to live sacrificially. If martyrdom isn't a requirement for loving one another, today's epistle makes it clear that some sort of self-giving action is required. Let us love not in word or speech, but in truth and action. The Message puts it this way: let's not just talk about love, let's practice real love. This is the only way we'll know we're living truly, living in God's reality. 1 John seems to give us a straightforward way to practice real love. The author puts it in the form of a question. How does God's love abide in anyone who has the world's goods and sees a brother or sister in need and yet refuses to help? The Church recognizes in this statement its mandate to engage in acts of mercy and charity. Such acts are meant to be tangible expressions of our love for our fellow human beings. When done well, they lift everyone and help weave a stronger community in which no one is left to handle adversity alone. Acts of charity and mercy can show the world what love looks like. To do good deeds is probably one of the first things we learn in our faith journey. Even young children are intentionally included in food and clothing drives. We foster young people's generous impulses by encouraging them to donate toys they no longer use, or to even use some of their own money to buy new toys to donate at Christmas. We nurture these humanitarian instincts as they grow and discover their own ways of getting involved. In growing our children in the soil of charity, we're helping show them what love can look like. Good works are seen as fundamental to who we are as Christians. I've talked about them in the abstract so far, but let's get specific about food. I can't name a single church in this region where youth and adults alike are not engaged in trying to help people in need of food. Heaven knows that the need is great. If we confine ourselves to just the population of children, some 22.8% of this county's children under 18 live with chronic food insecurity. And if you didn't happen to know already, food insecurity is defined by the USDA as limited or uncertain availability of nutritionally adequate foods, or uncertain ability to acquire these foods in socially acceptable ways. There are serious long-term consequences beyond the already disturbing idea that any child could be going hungry. Children exposed to food insecurity are more likely to be hospitalized and may be at higher risk for developing chronic diseases, may be at higher risk for behavioral and social issues, including fighting, anxiety, and bullying. At least 1 in 5 children in Calvert County has been projected had been projected to experience food security in 2020, before the pandemic. In general, SNAP enrollment, that's the Federal Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP enrollment among Maryland residents was 630,000 before the pandemic started. Applications to the program rose 400% last year, and participation rose to 845,000 people out of about 6 million residents. That's astounding. There's no question that there's a need around food, and we don't stand by when we recognize a need. There's Heartfelt of Southern Maryland, a primarily church-based program that makes sure students in need have some basic food for the weekends when they don't have access to free and reduced school meals. The man who brought this program to Calvert County, Mr. Woodford, shared his own experience of childhood poverty and hunger. And as if that hadn't been bad enough, he was also singled out and bullied because of it. He tells how generous, mostly anonymous community members stepped up to provide food for his family. That accomplished more than just preventing starvation. Decent, nutritious food allowed him to take full advantage of school and participate fully in life. The acts of mercy and charity shown decades ago continue to propagate. For Mr. Woodford, the Heartfelt Ministry is a direct response to the call of his Christian faith to love others. Now, you probably know this already, but good works are worth highlighting. All Saints has its own Heartfelt Ministry that supports children at Beach Elementary. Besides Heartfelt, there's Project Spudnik, whose team members raise organic produce in season for Calvert food pantries. There are members and friends of All Saints who provide meals for Project Echo once a month. The congregations that call this campus home also participate in the Calvert County Church's food pantry, food drives, Meals on Wheels, the Thanksgiving and Christmas baskets. Safe Nights and Reading Camp provide food as part of their missions. The Puerto Rico mission team didn't just stop when they couldn't travel to the island. They adapted, serving the Boys and Girls Club of Southern Maryland, especially with food collection and distributions. The famous outreach breakfast here nourishes us. At the same time, it helps finance outreach efforts. By the way, if you didn't know, each of these ministries would welcome anyone who feels called to serve others in this way. Think about it. Charitable work is part of the Christian call. Does love look like charity then? How about as more and more people are falling into food insecurity and poverty, does love just mean feeding more, collecting more clothing, helping to pay more people's utility bills? I don't know if it's because Jesus was said to have remarked, "The poor you will always have with you, but you will not always have me." Do we imagine that to mean we shouldn't try to deal with the origins of poverty? Isn't that rather like repeatedly pouring more water into someone's hole-riddled bucket when they run low, but never dealing with the bucket holes? Of course, it's easier to recognize a need when it's the lack of something, food, clothing, or what have you. It's easier to see when we're making a difference in people's lives that way, however temporary. It's safer and socially acceptable. It comes from a good place. And while it does involve sacrifice of time, effort, talent, convenience, and money, we mostly give from our relative abundance. But what about when we have more and more remarkable medical innovations, but millions who don't have access to them because they lack the wherewithal, or can't even afford regular visits with a primary care provider. Is that a need? As more and more people are incarcerated, yet our nation seems to experience more violence, is that a need? When someone lacks companionship or acceptance or opportunity or justice, aren't those needs? When we finally do recognize these as genuine needs, what does a loving Christian response look like in these situations? It's not only more challenging to see when society as a whole is failing people, it also costs considerably more to examine and rethink the larger systems involved. As individuals and as church, we are called to consider the role we play. Rethinking our own comfort and benefits carries the risk that we'll be asked to make greater sacrifices, maybe even painful sacrifices. I don't know about you, but that possibility makes me really uncomfortable. The surest way, though, to not recognize that others are in need may be to avert one's eyes while handing them what we've come to give. Christ sacrificed his life for us. This is why we ought to live sacrificially. Lutheran pastor Dennis Jacobson captured the tension Christians face between doing good works for the short term and working for systemic changes to make more permanent improvements. He warned the church against thinking it can ever be at peace with the world as it is. He wrote, "The works of mercy reveal our own need for mercy, our own limitations, our own poverty of spirit. Benefit can be found in these revelations. On the other hand, works of mercy are considerably limited if they are done without regard to systemic injustice. Society is pleased to have the church exhaust itself in being merciful toward the casualties of unjust systems." So what does love look like when we're doing good works and working to make ours a more just world? You know some of it already. The truth is that the church has been moving into this space for decades at least. Consider just Project Echo. Once upon a time, we thought that the problem and solution for homelessness was providing some shelter. But love has looked a lot like our learning. We have come to understand the more complex circumstances around homelessness, and we have responded to love's demand that we adapt to that learning. More than shelter, we now provide support services, education. We use contemporary, evidence-based understanding of what works to further the goals of those served and eliminate what doesn't work. The new Principal Mission Project is going to ask the same of us. We know love will require courage, patience, perseverance, and humility. For the rest, God knows. But given God's penchant for recreation and transformation, we can expect that we will be changed at least as much as the lives of those we seek to serve. And when we feel anxiety and uncertainty around what change is required of us, when we're not sure where we're going, how we're going to get there, we can be reassured that as we work to understand what love looks like in real life and real situations, in crafting our lives around love, We ultimately help Christ fashion us into his image, the very image of love, in spirit and in truth. I want to share an interesting internet tidbit I encountered while preparing this homily, but one with a profound message. It was a response to the question, does every language have a word for love? And I apologize for those who know the variety of Filipino languages. One answer was, no. I am an Ilocano speaker. Ilocano is a language up north in the Philippines and of Ilocano migrants to Hawaii and California. It is the language of the Ilocano people, indigenous hill tribes in Luzon, and the second largest Philippine language spoken by ethnic Filipinos in the US. We do not have a word for love. The nearest thing we use is ayat, which means like. Within my Ilocano-speaking family, my father shies away when we tease him to kiss our mom. They never say I love you to each other or to us. They were never cold. I grew up with lots of kisses and hugs. My father only stopped cuddling me to sleep when I became too heavy to carry at the age of 8. I have always felt loved. There is always a feeling of belongingness in our home. We know we love each other. We feel it, but we never say, I love you as a family. I guess Ilocanos just do not need the word. Beloved, may we walk in love as Christ loved us and gave himself for us, an offering and sacrifice to God. May we live such equally sacrificial lives that one day the world no longer needs a word for love, but sees it, feels it, hears it, touches it, and is touched by it through our every act. Amen.